Recording, nice. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first part one of our cold climate fruit webinar series. My name is Josie Dillon, and I'll be going through a quick introduction here, and then we'll be passing it off to Dr. Kari Peter. And we'll go ahead and wait just a minute or two so more folks can join, and then we'll get started. And just a quick reminder, I'll go through it a little bit later here, but try to use the Q&A feature rather than the chat. We'll leave about 5 to 10 minutes at the end to answer some of those Q&A questions. All right. Got about one more minute. I see some people joining. All right. For folks just joining here, we'll get started in a couple minutes. Well, in about a minute. Go through a quick intro and then pass it off to Dr. Kari Peter. All right, it is 12 o'clock Central Time on the dot, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Josie Dillon. I'm the statewide fruit outreach specialist with UW Extension, and I have the pleasure to be joined today by Dr. Kari Peter, also with Penn State, and Dr. Leslie Holland from UW is also attending, and we'll give a short introduction right after this. So today, Dr. Kari Peter will be talking about Marssonina leaf blotch. And I did want to mention that this is the first part in a 4-part webinar series. So folks, if you haven't registered for the remaining 3 webinars, you can go ahead and scan that or go to fruit.wisc.edu /webinars/apples right on the lower part of that flyer. So some really, really great talks coming up. Dr. Carrot Cox with Cornell is giving 2 talks on fire blight and apple scab. And then our last talk in April will be with Megan Luke, also from Pennsylvania State University. So today we'll be, like I said, we'll be hearing from Dr. Kari Peter. She's from Penn State University. She's an associate research professor in the Department of Plant Pathology and Environmental Microbiology. Her lab does a lot of research on Marssonina leaf blotch, and she will have a lot of very wonderful things to inform you all about this relatively new disease here in the upper Midwest. So our next webinar will be Friday, February 13th. So all these are the second Friday of the month from noon to 1 p.m. Central Time. And that talk will be on the updated NUA weather station fire blight and apple scab models. So make sure to sign up and register for that. I'm sure it'll be a really, really good talk. I also wanted to point out we have another webinar series with our berry crop folks. There was just one on honeyberries last week, so we missed that one, but there are 3 remaining, so you can go ahead and scan that as well if you're interested in any of those talks. And before we begin, I just wanted to remind everyone to mute yourselves. Again, use the Q&A chat to ask questions. If you're having some technical difficulties, feel free to direct message myself or Amy Friedig, who is one of the other panelists helping out with, technical aspects of this talk. The follow-up email will include responses to any unanswered questions we don't get to, some further links to resources, and then at the very end of the webinar series, I'll be sending out a webinar evaluation link. And now I will pass it off to Leslie to introduce Kari.
Take it. You want me to load?
Yeah, do it.
Okay. All right. We're loading. Awesome. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kari Peter. As Josie mentioned, she's joining us from the Department of Plant Pathology and Environmental Microbiology at Penn State University, where she's serving as an associate research professor. Her appointment is split 50% research and 50% extension, and she is located in what I hear is the heart of the tree fruit growing region of Pennsylvania at the Fruit Research and Extension Center. Her tree fruit pathology research and extension programs follow a holistic approach, all pest management systems from organic to conventional and full circle. That includes pre and post-harvest diseases. Her research program focuses on annual field trials evaluating conventional and organic fungicides and bactericides for the control of the most common fungal bacterial diseases affecting apples and peaches. Her work also aims at identifying sustainable management strategies for bitter rot of apple, which is certainly something that's come up in Wisconsin the last few years, as well as identifying and mitigating post-harvest apple rots and elucidating causal agents of apple tree decline. Dr. Peter, we're very pleased to have you this afternoon and excited to hear your talk on Marssonina.
All right, well, thank you so much. I'm just thrilled to be here today to be able to talk to you about one of the diseases that I like working on because it's very obvious. You know when you have it, and then you know basically when you don't have it when it's under control. So, as far as going forward, uh, I first identified this in Pennsylvania in September of 2017, and ironically, it popped up all at the same time in the Northeast. There was a report on it in Connecticut, in New York, even in New Hampshire. It just seemed to, whatever was special about 2017, this disease popped up. And this is what I initially saw in one of my orchards. It was this very interesting chlorotic pattern and severe defoliation. And so, as time has worn on, this isn't a disease that has gone away. I'm very well aware of it. Wherever apples are grown, pretty much in the eastern half of the United States. So I'm aware of it even in eastern Canada. It's not so much in the western half of the state, probably because they just don't have the right weather conditions, i.e., rain, to be able to support the infection of this disease. So this is pretty endemic wherever apples are grown. And so it often catches people off guard because one of the telltale symptoms is premature defoliation. So today, what we're going to basically cover is wanting to get the upper hand of this disease. Number one, properly identifying it because there are other pathogens, leaf pathogens out there that you could mistake for this. But Marssonina has a very, very particular MO, particular modus operandi when it's on the leaf. So we're going to walk through how to identify it. And then we're going to talk about the optimal time for managing disease, how to break that disease triangle to be able to successfully manage this, covering timing of spore dispersal, so that way you know when to apply the right fungicides, and also being aware of the right infection conditions for this disease. And then finally, ultimately, we'll talk about the most effective fungicides because, as I've found out, not all of them work. So our goal here is to not have this tree, as it's shown here on the lower left, premature defoliate. And I will tell you that from the time you see symptoms to the time of defoliation is very fast. And that tree in that lower left-hand corner is poor Honeycrisp, which is poor Honeycrisp can't catch a break. It is super susceptible to this disease, and that defoliation was in late September. So, I mean, that's how devastating this disease can be. So how to identify? Well, first you will see these black spots on the leaves, and they could look like scab. They could look like other foliar diseases that are out there, like alternary leaf spot or frog eye leaf spot, but those often have like distinct halos. And those don't defoliate the trees. This does. And you will see oftentimes just this coating of black spots. And those black spots will progress. So in that lower left-hand corner, you'll see that often the spots may coalesce. You may see necrosis within the center of those spots. It gets a little more yellow. And then as time progresses, the leaf just looks very, very yellow. You sort of these dark islands. And then if you use a hand lens, or what else I find pretty nifty is one of those like magnifying lenses that you can stick on your smartphone on the camera, you can see these little tiny black blobs as indicated in that lower center picture. That is very, very characteristic of Marssonina. There really isn't another foliar disease that looks that distinct, especially when you have so many on the leaf like that. So that is Marssonina. And then ultimately that defoliation will then lead, or I should say those yellowing the leaves they'll defoliate. There is no halfway with Marssonina. It's not just like a few leaves. The entire tree, if it becomes infected, if there's a few leaves infected, the majority of the tree can defoliate pretty quickly. So looking at some other examples of looking it up closely, this is another leaf. This is very early in the infection. This leaf didn't have very many spots. I put this under our dissecting microscope to get a nice close-up picture. But as you can see, these little black blobs, they almost look like little tiny sesame seeds that are on the leaf. And sometimes, depending on the time of the seasons, you may see those seeds or those fruiting bodies basically sprouting. They have something growing from them while they're germinating. And then ultimately it could look like this. So this is an older leaf where all those kind of threads, that's actual germination of the conidia of Marssonina. And what I believe is happening here is that the leaf, the fungus is going into overwintering mode. So it's going to overwinter, it's going to fall to the ground and overwinter, because this is how this pathogen overwinters from season to season, much like apple scab. So it's leaf sources can be a real key for spore sources the following season. Now, you may say, well, I'm going to get this confused with apple scab. Actually, you won't. Apple scab is very distinct compared to Marssonina. Apple scab has, when you see apple scab lesions, it looks velvety. I mean, that's one of the key diagnostic symptoms is a velvety lesion. It looks almost like it's flat. It's not shiny. As I tell my summer students, it looks like dirt marks are on, little dirt thumbprints are on the leaf. Well, Marssonina doesn't look like that. So scab is very tiny spores in comparison to Marssonina. And as you can see here where Marssonina pointed in those little tiny black blobs that are embedded, those fruiting bodies embedded into the leaf, it's very, very, very different compared to apple scab. You can easily have co-infection on the same leaf. And so that's not unusual. But just to make sure that you know what you have, because I think this is how this disease snuck up on us, is that I think since this came in late in the season, people may have thought, oh, that's just apple scab. And actually, it's quite distinct with regards to what their fruiting bodies look like. Now, it can infect fruit, but I will say this isn't common. I've seen this a handful of times, even under severe leaf infection situations, but it's something to be alert about. This is cameo fruit, and the interesting thing about these lesions is that they're about the size of an eraser, like a pencil eraser head, and they're depressed. But this is as far as it'll go. It will not expand like a fruit rot. You will not see much rotting underneath of it. It's just a lesion that goes sunken part way in, but that's it. And on the right there with that close-up of that picture, you can actually see kind of the fruiting body right in the middle of it. And so we left these out at room temperature for like a week or two and they didn't progress. So I knew it wasn't a fruit rot. So it's just something to be aware of. I do not see this all that often, even in my own orchards that are ravaged with Marssonina. I don't see this a lot. So, but it's something to be mindful of, but we really don't want it to get to this point. And another thing is that what I also have noticed with this is that you may not see it in the orchard at the time of harvest, but you will see it after you pull your fruit out of storage, because that was the case with this cameo. Okay, so as far as the optimal time for management, so the first thing to understand with management is when are the spores released? So I had a grad student, Philip Martin, I should say now, Dr. Philip Martin, who did work on bitter rot. So he was doing a lot of spore trapping in various orchards. And so we decided to piggyback off of those spore traps and test those spore traps for Marssonina spores. And this is what he found, is that over the course of the year, we see this area in the beginning of the season, sort of this burst of activity, and then it kind of drops off, but then we see this massive spike of activity of spores. So the question is, what's going on there? Well, Marssonina is very, very similar to very similar to apple scab. It has an ascospore as its primary infection. So it does have a primary infection period, much like apple scab. And in the case for Marssonina, it's a similar time as apple scab. It actually overlaps. We see it in about late April, more to mid to late May is when we see those initial ascospores come out. And then this is the time, of course, just like apple scab, if you nip it in the bud, pun intended, in that primary period, you don't have to worry about it for the rest of the season. However, if you don't nip it in the bud, you get this secondary infection. That's why we see this burst of spores in the summer. And you saw leaves with these spores, with these canidia on it. So there's a ton of inoculum out there. So the goal is we want to really tamp down and suppress the disease, break the disease triangle at that ascospore period in the beginning of the year. So we don't have to worry about chasing the disease and managing it later in the season. So the big question is, okay, well, like when is this time period in this early season? So serendipitously, I had a trial. I do a lot of field trials for chemical companies. And for BASF, they wanted me to look at Sevia in one of their new premix that's going to be coming out. Again, specifically Marssonina. And so I looked at Sevia of this premix that had a frac 7 in it at 2 different rates. They also wanted me to look at Fontellus and then Circadus, which is now called Tesseris. It's been changed to Tesseris. So the dark blue bar is the percent incidence of Marssonina on the leaf, and then the light blue bar is percent leaf loss due to Marssonina. That percent leaf loss includes that percent incidence includes the leaves that fell off the tree, because if there were no leaves on the tree, I can assume those trees all those leaves had incidence on it. So what was interesting with this, we rated this in mid-August. But what was interesting about that Sevia and that premix is that we only sprayed that product 4 times early in the season, at bloom, petal fall, second cover, and third cover. And for us, that was from May 2nd until June 13th. And then after third cover, after June 13th, we didn't spray anything. Trees were naked through all the weather. And then I will say during the times before bloom and at first cover, we were just spraying Mancozeb. In contrast to the Fontellus and Circadus, we sprayed those specifically at bloom, petal fall, first cover, then we followed up with Captan. But as you can see, in mid-August, we had really good control. So that told me, okay, specifically for that Sevia and that premix, there was something really important going on at that bloom, petal fall, second cover, third cover time period. And then when we came back in October, there wasn't much progression of the disease because there wasn't so much inoculum buildup. So even though we did see an increase in incidence, the leaf loss was pretty steady. But this just shows you that, even with it being suppressed as well as it did, we still did get incidence later in the season as expected, but it still didn't go bonkers. So really what we did early in the season really did a wonderful job at managing this disease later in the season. So now the question is, okay, this is all well and great, but what was going on during those times of from the bloom through third cover period? So I drilled down and really looked closely at the weather data. So this was weather data from our newest station here at the research station. So at the top, you've got temperature. And basically the temperatures I wrote were from, it was April 29th to June 20th there. And then the corresponding precipitation time. So the lower graph is the precipitation that occurred during those various dates. And then basically, if you draw a line up, it's the temperature is exact during those time dates. So the infection conditions for Marssonina is you need rain for the spore dispersal and only a minimum of 4 hours of leaf wetness. So it doesn't take many leaf wetness hours for that infection event to complete. But Marssonina is a bit of like a Goldilocks fungus. It really needs the specific temperature. No, really, it's around 68 degrees. Anything less than that, it's not going to like, because I noticed this like a year or 2 later, where we had like 100 hours of leaf wetness in early May, but the average temperature was like only around 50. And it really covered the Marssonina spore dispersal period, but we didn't get any Marssonina that year, or it was very low incidence. So really the years where I see that temperature coinciding with the right time when the spores are dispersed, it is go time. You need to control. But unlike apple scab, which definitely has a lot of forgiveness in its temperature, Marssonina is not like that. Marssonina is very similar to apple scab in many respects, but not when it comes to its malleability with temperature and infection. So the ideal temps during this time period in 2022 started in mid-May, and it of course went through about the middle of June, as far as when our trial was. And so looking more closely at our sprays in 2022, so at the beginning of the season we had bloom. Our bloom spray was around May 2nd. That was 53 to 62 degrees. That's on the cooler side. And it followed up with like in the 50s and lower 40s. These are averages. And so a little too cool. But then you have it in early, and as far as early to mid-May, this was the April 12th May 12th, petal fall. This was an interesting, we start getting warmer temperatures, and then we had that spray, and then we had a nice wetting event, a couple wetting events that coincided with the ideal temperature for Marssonina. So on May 18th, we had mancozeb. May 31st, basically as the month went on, the temperatures continued to be favorable. We had nice wetting events, and even through June. So what it basically determined was that petal fall to third cover period was really important for Marssonina control, particularly the petal fall period. What we've noticed is that we used to do scab counts in my lab up until a few years ago, and then we just can't get enough scabby leaves anymore to be able to do it. So, but during the time we were doing it, we were watching as far as the maturity of apple scab, ascospores coming from overwintering leaves. So we would always notice a burst of apple scab spores at bloom, and then it would drop off thereafter. But it was like around petal fall and just after petal fall, like the week after petal fall, we saw this burst of other massive numbers of this other spore, and it was Marssonina. So Marssonina, so we actually had sort of the visual evidence of when those ascospores were coming out as far as for Marssonina, and it coincided with that petal fall period. So lesson here is that to control Marssonina, you want to be controlling it from petal fall till about mid or early to mid June. So for us, I don't know. It really depends on the season with regards to what's going on outside. So I would go make sure you're paying attention to the weather, especially around petal fall, and then in about a month after. So I give you sort of phenology landmarks, but that could change with regards to what's happening in the season with regards to delay or something, or the season being early or late. So it's just something to be aware of. But it's basically if you see stuff happening around petal fall and with regards to nice good temperatures that are in the upper 60s and you have a wetting event, that's going to kick off Marssonina. So the next question is, okay, I know when the spores are being dispersed, what do I use to control it? So over the years, we have really looked at a lot of different products, and there are some winners and some clear losers out there. So first, broad spectrums. You can't go wrong with broad spectrum. Captan, great. I will skip Xyrem in a second. I'll come back to it. But mancozeb, excellent. And I really encourage growers to use rain-fast mancozeb. It is worth the extra money. If you use non-rain-fast mancozeb, make sure you use an adjuvant, a spreader sticker with it. That really does a great job as far as staying on the leaves during frequent rain events. I did a side-by-side comparison a few years ago looking at that, and the rain-fast mancozeb does live up to its rain-fastness. So just a kind of a public service announcement here about mancozeb. Sulfur, this is good as long as it's micronized. The micronized version, it just seems to work better because you get better coverage of the leaf. And the bare minimum is 6 pounds to the acre, but during really rainy years, you definitely want to increase that. I'll talk a little bit more about sulfur at the end based on some work I did this year. Omega is a great product, but you want to use it towards the higher rate. So this is fluazanam. There is a generic out there called Orbis, but this is a unique FRAC group. It's FRAC group 29, and it's a nice rotation partner for controlling disease. Now going back to Xyram, so I have removed Xyram from some of my slides and for other talks is because Xyram's on the chopping block with the EPA. It hasn't been formally announced yet, but it's pretty much a done deal that Xyram's going to be pulled from the market. So this is along with Furbam and Thyram. So I wouldn't lean on Xyram. You will be used to use whatever Xyram stock supply you have left, but this isn't something we're probably going to be able to count on in the near future. FRAC Group 3, excellent. FRAC Group 3 is great for Marssonina. So we're talking about Sevia, Trionic, Procure, Lunaflex has a FRAC 3 in it. Inspire Super. This is great as long as you're tank mixing it with mancozeb. And so the difenoconazole in Inspire Super isn't quite as robust as like the FRAC 3 that's in Sevia. So just beware of that. Folks should be tank mixing anyway, but just word to the wise. So FRAC 3, great. FRAC 11, and the 7 and 11s, I should say. FRAC 7 and 11s is great, but FRAC 11 by itself, it's a bit of a stinker. It's very weak against Marssonina, which is why I've discouraged growers from using any FRAC 11s super early in the season. I'm talking about the apple scab time because of its inadequacy for controlling Marssonina. And this is where I've seen growers get tripped up with Marssonina control is because they used a FRAC 11 around bloom petal fall and first cover, and then I saw Marssonina. So it's something to be aware of. The Luna Sensation and Maravon, these are strong products because of the FRAC 7. The FRAC 7 is doing all of the heavy lifting there. So that's a good transition into FRAC 7. Out of all of these, FRAC 7 is the best. And this is good because really at the apple scab time, so it peaks at bloom and then we're coming in at petal fall with probably Marssonina. FRAC 7 is the strongest for apple scab right now as far as being reliable and we don't see too many issues with fungicide resistance. So I've gotten the Pennsylvania growers to really be focusing their FRAC 7 usage that time of the year. And this is good because you're also going to get Marssonina control. So you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck in controlling diseases at that time period when you're using a FRAC 7. Topsin M, so if you're thinking about Topsin M more for your cover sprays, especially in early cover sprays, it's good as long as you're tank mixing with something like Captan. And then finally, the organic products. I've looked at Quava and Double Nickel, Regalia, Stargus, Coppers, bicarbonates and oxidates, and also plant extracts and oils. They poor to fair, and I'm being generous when I'm saying fair. Sulfur is your best bet for organic, but I'm going to go a little deeper into sulfur because not all sulfurs are created equal. But I need to stress this for anyone who grows organically and you are using apple scab resistant varieties. Gone are the days where you don't have to spray any chemicals early in the season for apple scab because you have resistant trees. You can't do that anymore because those trees are very, very susceptible to Marssonina. So you need to be using sulfur early in the season, probably starting at late bloom and petal fall and going till about second or possibly third cover depending on the conditions. Sorry for the bad news, but that is the case. And this is really where I've seen the most problems over the years are with people who are planting apple scab resistant varieties who don't need to control and didn't realize they needed to control until Marssonina snuck up on them. So the goal is when using these fungicides strategically is avoiding premature defoliation and ultimately pathogen buildup from season to season. And so I think, so I just mentioned this I forgot I had this pop up. About sulfur and organic. focusing on frac 3 and 7s from bloom through early June, and save the frac 11 fungicides to manage your summer rots. And don't worry, I was mentioning this before we started to the hosts, that I know that this is going to be overwhelming thinking about another disease, but I have a game plan for you as far as looking at full season issues, and just kind of sifting or just kind of gently dovetailing in Marssonina control. So we'll talk more about that. But frac 11 fungicides are really your best bet for your summer rots, like bitter rot, which I know is a problem for whoever grows Honeycrisp anywhere in the United States, with the exception of maybe the West Coast. Okay, so a spray program to manage Marssonina. So this is just focusing on Marssonina right now. So late dormant, still do your copper sprays because, again, this is an ascospore-driven fungus like apple scab. So if you're putting out your dormant copper there to manage apple scab, you're also going to get Marssonina control. From late April to May, you're going to want to be focusing, controlling for scapple scab, powdery mildew, rust, and now Marssonina. So this is when you want Marssonina. You need to be thinking about Marssonina, but you've got all these other diseases to worry about. But don't worry, if you focus on your frac 3s and 7s like Sevia, Inspire Super, Luna Tranquility, Flex, Excalia, Miravis, Tesseris, these will cover all of these diseases. And you also want to be using a rainfast mancozeb at this time. So you should be good to go there. So again, you don't have to worry about adding in something new to worry about this as far as controlling this other disease. And again, organic folks during this time, you probably haven't been managing diseases because you didn't have to worry about it. Now you do. You want to use sulfur, and you want to use a micronized sulfur. And then in early June, continue to monitor for conditions because we still see spores, ascospores possibly still popping out. So continue with the frac group 3 and 7 fungicides. You probably will want to be tank mixing with Captan at this point, because you might have exceeded the 77-day pre-harvest with mancozeb. And just as a reminder, if you manage Marssonina early in the season, this isn't going to be a headache for you later on. You aren't going to be worrying about premature defoliation and kind of really questioning the health of your trees at the end of the season because they're still going to have leaves on them. So during that time period, you can focus on controlling rots as opposed to chasing after Marssonina. Because again, for summer rot control, your frac 11s are going to be your best bet because bitter rot seems to be the biggest problem child right now. And frac 11s do not touch Marssonina. So that's just kind of a word to the wise. And another reminder, just be mindful of how many frac 7s you use. It doesn't matter if they are a single or a premix. You're allowed, according to the label, and the label's the law, 4 applications of frac 7s a season. And so just be mindful of that as you are juggling your sprays during the season, which I know is easier said than done. Okay, so as I mentioned, you might be thinking, geez, how am I going to juggle all these diseases? This is another disease to worry about. So over the years, I've kind of developed a table for folks to kind of visualize as far as how to be mindful of what they're spraying and when, and where they should be focusing which fungicides at the certain time of the year versus other times. So first, late dormant to green tip, it's your copper. You know, copper is going to be covering a lot of things. You can also use sulfur at this time too if you want. Rainfast mancozeb, I recommend. And I know some people do use psyllium for apple scab. Some people have gotten away from psyllium. I'm just throwing it out there because it's an option. But just remember, you don't need to, it's important to be controlling for disease at this period, but don't feel like you need to go hog wild at this because the disease pressure is not going to be extreme at this time of the year. The spores are not going to be at their highest. You may or may not have ideal conditions depending on how the season is trickling out with Mother Nature. So you can be conservative at this time. And so you don't need to bring out the big guns with the more expensive chemicals. Just have a good coverage with, dormant copper, and then followed by something like a rainfast mancozeb or a heavy dose of sulfur. Tight cluster. Remember, folks, tight cluster is a time to control powdery mildew. This has caught a lot of people off guard in Pennsylvania the last few years, to the point where I have been needing to give repeated powdery mildew talks season to season to remind people. We're so focused on these diseases that require wetness. Powdery mildew is the opposite. It's a dry weather disease. So just remember, tight cluster is a time when you want to be really hammering for powdery mildew. So you want to be focusing your primary product to be for powdery mildew, and then tank mix with mancozeb, because again, at this time, scab isn't going to be too much of a problem because the spore count isn't too extreme. Marssonina is not on our radar yet. So you want to focus on your powdery mildew options. Sulfur, you can get away with sulfur. There's also powdery mildew specific products like Torino and Gatton. They are limited how many times you can use them a year. These are excellent. I've tested them and they really do suppress powdery mildew. And I believe you're only allowed to use them once a season. I'm pretty sure Torino's once and Gatton's probably once. They're unique modes of action. Rime is also a good one. This was Top Guard. Now it's concentrated. It's a concentrated Top Guard. Rime is very good for powdery mildew as well. Organic, your options are sulfur and potassium bicarbonate. But sulfur really is a great tool, a disease management tool for its broad spectrum. So from pink bloom through about first cover. So this is when you want to be focusing on Marssonina, apple scab, powdery mildew, and rust. So you want to be focusing on also using a rainfast mancozeb. I can't pound that enough, pound that home enough. So again, this probably looks familiar. So even with Marssonina in a mix and with those other diseases in a mix, still focus on using your frac 3s and 7s. This will be good for scab. It's going to be good for rust, especially if you're tank mixing with mancozeb, and powdery mildew as well. And then, but just as a reminder, during this period, especially from late bloom onward, organic folks are going to be needing to use sulfur for Marssonina. Potassium bicarb won't touch Marssonina. It will touch scab. EcoSwing and potassium bicarb also help with powdery mildew as well. So just as a heads up about those products. Because I poached this slide from something else. I was trying to remember why I had that information, and that's why. But then finally, June through October, we're worrying about rots, secondary powdery mildew, which typically isn't a problem for a lot of people. It's there, but not too bad. But I will say early June to about early July, I would recommend Aprovia and Omega. Especially if you struggle with bitter rot and Marssonina. Both of these products will control both of those diseases very well, especially if there's really good disease conditions. We're talking warm and wet, especially for for more than a few hours. We've tested Aprovia for bitter rot. This is excellent, but it does have a 28-day PHI. Omega has a 28-day PHI, 28 to 30. So you need to use those early in the season. So you could think about keep saving a frac 7 for that early time period to help with bitter rot and Marssonina. The little remnants of Marssonina are coming out. And then as far as the summer, from mid-June through harvest, this is when you want to focus your frac 11s. Flynn Extra, Luna Sensation, Maravon. With these applications, include 2 to 3 pounds of Captan. Captan is your best friend. Can use Captan by itself as well. But these products, there's a very limited arsenal that controls bitter rot. And it's across the board, really, no matter what species or species complex, they all seem to be similar. One product I forgot to put on here that I want to bring to your attention is this new product called Axios out of UPL. It's a unique frac group 52. If you use that product has 2 great features. It controls powdery mildew and apple scab, and that's it. I've looked at this product for a long time, and it does have limits to its controls. So you don't want to be using that during a Marssonina time because it's not going to give you adequate Marssonina control. But you could use it at tight cluster. That's a good product to use at tight cluster and at pink as well. So I forgot to put that. I just remembered right now I forgot to put that. So just to put that on your radar. Before I send this, before I forward this talk, I'll be sure to add that information just as a reminder. So back to the June through harvest. So these products also will control your sooty blotch and fly speck. That just goes without saying. Sooty blotch and fly speck is pretty straightforward to control conventionally. So all of these things, all of these products recommended here are going to control sooty blotch and fly speck. In the case of organic during the summer for rots, you got sulfur, serenade, double nickel, ozone, regalia. What I would recommend is really keeping sulfur as your base and possibly adding. These other products are a bit weaker depending on your disease pressure, but it's just something to be mindful of. And then the last thing, I'll just as a reminder, all these options, all these diseases to worry about, you have limitations with FRAC 7, so you got to be strategic with how you use them. One thing I always recommend to growers at the end of the season, if you have storage in mind, use Maravon. You get a lot of, Maravon isn't cheap, you get, again, a tremendous amount of return from using Maravon. It controls bitter rot and it will also suppress diseases when they're in storage as well. So this will, if you hold anything for a few months, this will pay off with this control. And then, so just as a reminder about the FRAC 3s, because we talk about these a lot, each FRAC 3 is different with regards to the number of applications that are allowable per season. So just make sure you refer to the product label. Okay, so let's talk about sulfur. So I've mentioned sulfur many times over the last several slides. And so just by chance this year I had some space in a couple of my research blocks to do a side-by-side comparison of micronized sulfur. So I used microthiol disperse in comparison with yellow jacket sulfur. So this isn't micronized. This is just regular wettable sulfur. And I used the rate of 6 pounds. That might sound low, but in my experience with using microthiol disperse, 6 pounds is really enough, I can see, with decent control in a moderate disease year. This year was an extreme year. So I will say that I saw the limits to my thoughts of using the rates of sulfur. So I will tell you that in Pennsylvania, this year what I noticed is that 6 pounds of microthiol disperse, it can control apple scab and it can control Marssonina. However, 6 pounds of yellow jacket does not control apple scab and Marssonina. This isn't apples to apples here with regards to sulfur. It is apples to oranges. And it all boils down to its formulation. Micronized goes on much more even on the leaf, so you get better coverage. Yellow jacket, not so much. It's to get a better control, you definitely need a higher rate. And so just to show you some data here, for the top part for apple scab, this all came from a couple different blocks. But as you can see, untreated was pretty decent with regards to disease pressure. Microthiol disperse really suppressed it in the leaves, but we had some issue in the fruit. I think if I used a little more sulfur, I would have gotten better control. But as you can see, yellow jacket did not fare so well. So this was really interesting. So I just want to get the word out that you can't just use the same rates if you're using different products. You can get away with less with the microthiol than with yellow jacket. You're going to have to use a lot more yellow jacket sulfur to get comparable control. And then in the table below, right below the apple scab, is Marssonina. And as you can see, there's a big difference, especially with incidence and defoliation. The yellow jacket treated trees were a lot more defoliated than the microthiol disperse. So granted, this was a super high pressure year for us because we had 1 to 2 inches of rain from May 1st through July 31st. So we had just the plethora of disease this year, you name it, we had it. So this was actually a good year to sort of test this comparison. So this is more, again, another public service announcement in case you weren't aware of this, because I really wasn't aware of it until I did the side-by-side comparison. But I like microthiol disperse. It just goes on very nicely, and you can use less of it. I think your bag will go a lot farther as a result. Okay, so just to kind of wrap up the fungicide conversation, the goal is to avoid premature defoliation and pathogen buildup. You may get things may slip through the cracks and you get disease, but if you may see disease on the leaves, but as long as you don't have massive defoliation, that's okay. We still want to kind of keep it, reduced with the pathogen buildup, but really that goal is reducing defoliation because, like I said, defoliation occurs quickly and it occurs fast. This is one of the most aggressive foliar diseases I've ever encountered. More aggressive, way more aggressive than apple scab. And so to the point as far as this can, for lack of a better phrase, this can mess up your trees. In this poor little Honeycrisp block of mine, I really messed up the fruiting bud initiation in this block because of that premature defoliation. So this is definitely, I know growers are concerned about this, but this is something you really need to stay on top of if this is in your orchard and you've seen it. And this also this can weaken trees as well because the premature defoliation, they aren't getting their carbohydrate kind of buildup that they need for the following season. So just something to be aware of. And I have this concern, and it's been kind of going back and forth over the years, and I've always worried about if we have a light apple scab year and Marssonina is dominant, is Marssonina going to eventually replace apple scab? I still don't know the answer to this. I thought I was going to see this sooner rather than later, but I see apple scab fluctuating year to year, and I see Marssonina fluctuating year to year. So I don't think we're at that point yet, because apple scab is very much alive and well in a lot of my blocks when I thought it was gone. So, but it's, again, something to be worried about, but we don't want that happening. So all the more reason just to go and be vigilant about your mitigation tools. So just as to quickly summarize, nuggets of wisdom just to remind you about Marssonina blotch, how to identify. Remember, the lesions aren't funny. This isn't apple scab. These are typically dark blotches. The leaves then gradually turn yellow. In those dark blotches, you'll see a black fruiting body and then subsequent defoliation. So you may want to kind of, if you don't already do it, carry around a hand lens or have that nifty little attachment for your smartphone to be able to double check some of these lesions that you may see pop up during the season. When are the spores available? Well, depending on the weather and depending on the time of year, could be anywhere from late April through about early June. And really mid-May does seem to be the sweet spot when action starts happening. Secondary spores are available from late June to October. That's when the primary infection gets established. Optimal infection conditions. As I reminded you, this is a Goldilocks pathogen. It needs its right temperature. So it likes those really warm temperatures, 68 to 77 degrees, and it doesn't take many leaf wetness hours. But really, that temperature is probably really very critical for the success of infection. Best time to control, we want to be looking at about late bloom through about second or third cover, as what I like. Whenever that is, or typically early June is usually when it'll be, because I know that time period can change year to year. Best fungicides to manage, your broad spectrums, your FRAC group 3s, your FRAC group 7s, and just as a reminder, FRAC 11s they don't work. There's no way around it. They are just ineffective against Marssonina. Best cultural control, I didn't mention this earlier, but I want to emphasize it now. Whatever cultural management you are doing for apple scab is also going to help for Marssonina. So removing leaves. So you can do that through urea, through flail mowing, through lime, lime sulfur as well, dormant copper sprays. So all of these different sprays can help. But anything that you can do to knock back those overwintering spores are going to help you. So, and then just as another friendly public service announcement, fungicides work best if they're applied before the rain event. So being proactive and instead of after the rain event, as opposed to being reactive. Yes, fungicides have been developed to be very good in attacking fungi that are actively infecting. We call that reach back or kickback, but we really don't want to depend on that all the time. We want to be in a very proactive mode and keeping things protected. And another thing, just as a friendly reminder, is not to stretch your cover sprays, or really not to stretch sprays to begin with. I am not sure what the vibe in Wisconsin is about alternate row middle sprays. This is the bane of my existence in Pennsylvania. I could give a whole talk on it, but anyway, I see a lot of issues with alternate row middle sprays or half sprays, and when growers stretch them too much early in the season. So just a word to the wise. And then finally, I just want to give a shout out personally about a podcast that we have, myself and an extension educator, Don Seifert. We have the Dr. Tree Fruit and Don podcast. If you aren't aware of it, it's found on wherever podcasts you listen to your podcasts. And so we're trying to do like an episode a month in the winter off season, but once the season kicks off, we're doing it weekly for a couple months, and then we drop to every 2 weeks. But we talk about season updates, what to be looking for. It may or may not be relevant in time for you, but it could be relevant as far as depending on where you are in the season, because you might be a smidge behind us because we're a little further south than you. And then also Penn State has an online newsletter and put out updates and good nuggets of information. So just as a heads up about the information that we have at Penn State, in case you want additional materials beyond what Wisconsin provides. So, and then with that, just want to give a shout out and my funding sources for folks that made all this possible. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Got time to spare.
Awesome. Perfect timing. Yeah, we have a few questions in Q&A, a couple questions in the chat too. So I'll start with the first one here. Are the black fruiting bodies, are those conidia?
Yes, those are
Yes. Okay.
conidia.
Great.
Correct.
Great.
Yeah.
And then just so everyone's aware, we usually do not encourage alternate row middle
Oh,
grace.
fantastic.
So
Music to my
yeah.
ears. I am so
Yes.
glad to hear that.
And then another question here from the chat. John is asking, what is the evidence for ascospore aging out? Is it similar to scab ascospores in June and under some of those higher temperatures we see later in the summer?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if much research has been on, but I would say, considering how similar this is, I bet we could apply, intuitively similar principles. So I would think that, that early, I bet the ascospores early are more important than the ones that are later on. So I'm assuming there is a point they do age out, especially if the conditions aren't there.
Great, great. All right, so moving on to the Q&A. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to throw those in the Q&A and we'll work through those. So first one here, do the fruiting bodies occur in the top or the bottom of the leaf or
Oh,
both?
good question. Top. I've only seen it in the top of the leaves.
Okay, awesome. All right, next question. What would be the rate of microionized sulfur you would recommend using in a bad, quote unquote, Marssonina year?
Oh, I would say I maybe bump it up to 8 to 10 pounds per acre. I'd go
Okay,
that high. Yeah, because
awesome.
obviously 6 pounds was not enough this year. I mean, like I said, in years past, I've had good luck with 6 pounds, but this was a bad year. So I probably, if I would have used 8 to 10, it would have been probably stopped it in its tracks.
Nice. And then maybe kind of a question for Leslie and I, but how prevalent is this in Wisconsin? In my time out in the orchards, I've seen it quite a bit in the last couple of years, kind of in both organic and conventional orchards. But Leslie, if you have more to add, go for it.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing the same trends, Josie. I've certainly gotten more phone calls over the last few years, and it's kind of been a scenario that you pointed to early, Carrie, of kind of, especially with folks harvesting some early varieties, and then you're in the orchard, so you're not spraying, and then you have that
Yep,
window of no fungicide, and then we get a rain in August, September, and
yep.
then you don't have any residual, and then you're just really starting to see that Marssonina kick up. So I think we've started to see more of that trending, especially in some of these more susceptible varieties.
I will say to follow up on that, the symptom prevalence is that so it seems the symptoms have become obvious earlier as the years have progressed. So that first year we saw it in September, then like the next year I saw it like early September, August, and then July, and then this year for me, I saw it as early as mid-June. So as far as that's how severe our conditions were, I think the first it was like around June 20th I saw them. That's the earliest I've ever seen Marssonina.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that's as far as people scouting, I would, if it's a good year, if it's a warm May with rain around petal fall and then shortly thereafter, I would definitely begin scouting, like probably in June, and then most definitely in July.
And then, all right. So next question, where did Marssonina originate from? Is it more East Coast or Europe
That's a
or
good
yeah.
So in my readings of it, I think it'd been lurking in the woods, like aspen. Like I have this memory of reading about it being connected with like aspen trees. But I feel like one of the earliest reports, it was in Wisconsin, like and not in apple orchards, but it was like identified maybe like a cousin in the woods in Wisconsin. Very low incidence, but it was popping up here and there. And it's one of these questions that you sort of dare dabble into is climate change.
Mm,
Is that has it always been lurking at a low level? And scab may have been kind of being the dominant foliar fungus, and was it just over taking over? And then we just sort of had the planets align right from 2017 or maybe the year before onward, and it just was able to survive. The other thing is, one thing I do not know is the survivability of winter, because this is predominantly in warmer countries. Like I had Korean visitors visiting a couple years ago, and they saw blotch right away, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's blotch." And so in South Korea, their conditions are similar to ours, but definitely more on the warmer side. And so I'm wondering if our more mild winters has not knocked this back far enough, and that's why it is coming forward. And once it gets established, it's like putting the horse back in the barn. It's hard to get it back in. So I have a feeling like, even though depending on our overwintering conditions now, season to season, it's out there. So I'm wondering if it's always been there at a low level, and then we just had the right conditions for it to pop out. That's my thought.
interesting. Yeah,
Could be
interesting. Yeah.
someone's PhD, a graduate student's
Yeah.
PhD.
Yeah. Would be really interesting to dive more into that for sure. All right. Next question here. So, in the Northeast, some organic growers believe that a tank mix of potassium bicarbonate and potassium silicate, like Sil matrix, is an
Uh-huh.
effective way to help control Marssonina leaf blotch. Have you had any experience with this or heard of this out
I
east?
haven't used, I mean, I'm always ready to try something. I've used potassium bicarbonate and didn't touch it. So, if they had success, but see, I always challenge that. Okay, I was like, okay, as a scientist, you wanted an untreated control. And also, what were the conditions that season? It's like the same people who tell me they didn't get fire blight that year, and I'm like, well, it wasn't a good fire blight year. We didn't have conditions. So I have heard I've heard stuff through kind of the grapevine about the what was it, Silmatrix it was, I think.
Yeah,
I think that's a Certus product, I think. I haven't tried that, but that's something that I would want to look into, and I'm going to make a note of this. But I know potassium bicarb does not work, but who's to say there may be a synergy? There's a synergy between two. I don't know.
sure.
But I'm willing to throw that into one of my research orchards to see.
Kind of related here. I know some growers have been using oxidate a little bit, but could a sanitizer like oxidate be kind of used in combination with something like sulfur?
Uh, yes, but I will say, okay, so sulfur is probably going to be doing the heavy lifting. Again worked with oxidate for a number of years, and it definitely doesn't work against scab. So I say that at the same time where I did work with a grower in New York who looked at oxidate as like a dormant spray or just before the season to try to clean up his trees. And he said he saw an improvement. But remember, oxidate is just a sterilant. It's just going to clean up whatever's in the moment. Not going to persist.
Sure.
But uh, with that, you can try it. Oxidate isn't cheap, but I will say sulfur is going to be that's what's going to be doing the heavy lifting.
Nice. All right, shifting gears a little bit, I had a couple questions on spore trap captures in winter months. Um, I guess someone was just curious kind of about that procedure. And then also, was the trapping data you showed, was that just 1 year or a combination of multiple years?
That was a combination of multiple years, and
Okay.
and how we did it is we were collecting rainwater, and so my student Philip, he had these 250 mil conical tubes hanging in apple trees and then also on the ground, and so he was catching rainwater in two different locations in the orchard, and we had them in a Honeycrisp orchard, in a Red Delicious orchard, and a Rome orchard. So Honeycrisp and Rome are very, very susceptible to Marssonina. And where the Red Delicious was, Red Delicious wasn't by itself. So there's definitely Marssonina in the Red Delicious orchard because it was multiple cultivars. And so it was over a couple years that we did the spore trap captures. And again, that initial spore trapping was done for bitter rot. So we were testing for bitter rot spores where we found bitter rot spores are around all year long. So there is no there is no off time with bitter rot spores. But I thought, well, hey, Marssonina is sort of a similar MO with regards to using rainwater and dispersal. Let's go back and dip into those spore trappings and see. And we worked with some folks in Switzerland who developed sort of some molecular tools to be able to isolate the Marssonina in a sample and to be able to detect it. And so, but that was over, I think it was 2 years or 3 years, I think. It was combined data. He did it, he tested samples and then combined the data. And that was the trend. Yeah. And I did see the individual trends and they were both similar. So there was no anomaly. They all had that like kind of burst in the early spring with a little dip and then the increase, which makes sense based on what we see in the season.
Yeah, interesting. All right, we have probably time for one more question here, and then anything we haven't answered, I will pass off to Kari and send that in a follow-up email, as well as some resources and links out. So let's see. If there is a disease-resistant cultivar, but if they have a disease-resistant cultivar, but other varieties in their orchard are more susceptible, do you suggest spraying just that cultivar or kind of the whole orchard?
Oh, you need to spray the whole orchard.
Yeah, okay.
And I can attest to this personally because I have mixed variety orchards that have mixed susceptibility. So, I would just out of precaution spray the whole orchard because, fungi are much smarter than us, and there is this chance that you can overwhelm natural resistance. And so if the pressure is high enough, and I've seen this with multiple pathogen systems. So, but there is, one thing I did take this slide out from a previous talk, but, and this was just my own anecdotal evidence. There is a range of susceptibility among the cultivars. And so, Honeycrisp being a hot one, Rome being a hot one. Gala varies depending on the time of year. Cameo is very susceptible. Golden Delicious is very susceptible. Red Delicious can be very susceptible. But I will say Stamen and Cortland, not so much. I know those are old varieties, but those don't really get too much Marssonina. So Fuji's a real susceptible variety. So there definitely is a range of susceptibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you want to spray everything. If it's in the same orchard, if it's a mixed variety orchard, don't take your chances in anything leaking through to keep the disease suppressed.
Awesome. Well, we're just 1 minute past 1 o'clock. There's about 4 questions. So like I said, I will pass these off to Kari and just wanted to say a huge thank you for joining us today, Kari. This is such great information. I know growers have been wanting to learn more about this disease. And yeah, thank you so much, all the attendees, for joining, and take care.
Thanks, Kari.
Yeah, thank you. And then I'll email you a PDF of the talk and whoever. I'm just going to make that one modification that I forgot about, and then you can use it or distribute it wherever you want. Post it anywhere, it doesn't matter.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that, because I know there was a lot there and it's overwhelming. So they may want to go back and review and actually have pictures just to help them out too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. All right. Well, have a great day. See ya.
Okay, thanks a lot. All right, thanks again.
Season, Kari. Thanks.
Yeah, you too. You too. All right, take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.